Good morning. I'm Minobung Anna Branch. I have the privilege of serving as the Senior Vice President for Equity at Rutgers University, where I'm also a professor of sociology. I'm delighted to moderate today's panel on shame at the intersections of race, class, gender, and sexuality, featuring Dr. Mignon Moore, Dr. Ellen Short, and Dr. Pere Halkitis. Welcome, panelists. I'm looking forward to a wide-ranging conversation on shame, the closet, and intersectional identity. You collectively reflect such dynamism and intellectual breadth, so let's dive in. So while we're aware of your distinguished accomplishments referenced in your bio, please share what brings you to this work. And if I could, I'd love to start with you, Ellen.
Great. I thought about this question, and in thinking about it, I came up with 4 things that brings me to this work. The first one is my love as a psychologist of the field of psychology. And I think the second one is my love of group dynamics and my endless curiosity about groups and group life and some of the really fascinating things that happen in groups in general, and how we spend so much time in groups throughout our lives. And we really don't necessarily pay much attention to that. So I've always found that really fascinating. The third thing I know is my identity as a Black woman, as an African-American woman, and all of the intersectional identities that go along with that has really informed my work. And I think the fourth one is just always trying to stay in tune with the fact that the field of counseling and psychology, although it's done a great deal of good, it's also done a great deal of harm in terms of pathologizing people of color and women. And so my commitment to the work is to have a positive impact that in some small way reverses that. And so those are the 4 things that really bring me to the work and that I feel most passionate about it. And I also want to make a contribution to the work through my teaching, obviously my scholarship and the consultation work I do for everyone, but particularly for people of color and women.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that answer. We're going to be coming back to some of the things you raised. Mignon, if I can turn to you, I'd love to hear from you.
Sure. Hello, and thank you again for inviting me to participate in this conversation this morning. For me, I'd say what brings me to this work is a quest for freedom, for liberation. And within the academy, I'd say the liberation comes from being able to research topics that are of critical importance to understanding the structural position of different groups in society and not marginalizing certain groups in our quest for understanding how the social structure sets up inequalities, a liberation or freedom for my people who are Black people to understand how LGBTQ people fit into our racial and ethnic communities. And hopefully through the Academy, other groups will follow course or have followed course or also doing this work, trying to understand how people can have a racial and ethnic and cultural identity and also have an LGBTQ identity and how those things work together for them in different ways. And I guess a liberation of my own, being able to be an openly Black lesbian woman, a mother, a professor, and have all of those experiences inform the work that I do, the types of questions that I bring to my research, right? Perhaps I have a particular vantage point that can be used to understand larger sociological processes and to have a freedom when I walk in a room of not having to hide anything and being able to lay down the unspoken things on the table that can help us move forward.
Again, so much richness there that we'll be coming back to. Thank you. Perry, can I turn to you?
Absolutely. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And thank you for the opportunity to be with these amazing colleagues. One of the great privileges of my life is that I'm surrounded by powerful, smart, amazing female identified people. And one of them is my niece, Sophia Halkitis, who often says, "Oh, Uncle Perry, research is me search." And I say that because I've spent the last 25 years working on the health of gay men and researching the health of gay men. I am a white gay man who has, lived his life through the last 40 years, unfortunately defined by the lens of AIDS in my population. And I have spent a good deal of my time fighting the battles to try to eradicate this disease, which continues to perpetuate what's going on today. But over the last 10 years, and certainly in the last 4 years, when I was given the platform of being the Dean of the School of Public Health, I felt an obligation, I sensed an obligation to use this platform to speak about the injustices that LGBTQ people face, to speak about the racism that continues to exist in the LGBTQ population, to talk about, as I've learned from my dear friend Ellen Short, about how we navigate spaces and respect people's intersectional identities. And importantly for me today, I'm here to honor the life of Tyler Clementi, who is one person in a constellation of millions of LGBTQ people whose lives were taken way too early from us because of societal structures. We find ourselves in this incredibly vulnerable time where our lives are at risk. So as a researcher, I feel it is critical to be here, but as a researcher who is an activist who wants to demand change, I want to help move our country forward, move our university forward, and move our world forward. So I'm here for those reasons.
Thank you. Again, such brilliant early reflections with so much food for thought for us to follow up on and discuss. In some ways, I want to start where you ended, Perry, which is how do we think about Tyler as an individual in a constellation, right? The threads connecting what Ellen talked about in terms of group dynamics and what Mignon talked about in our ability to be open, right? And the challenges, in many ways, Tyler's story sets up all of those things. The tensions and the absences of those freedoms and liberation, as Mignon talked about. So whoever wants to kick us off, please do.
I'm happy to pick up where I left off, which is I think one of our challenges moving forward, or our challenges have been for the last forever, is to normalize the lives of LGBTQ people. I often share with my students a story about my brother, a working class mechanic guy from Queens. He's a good guy from Queens, not a bad guy from Queens. Who, when my niece, I come back to my niece again, who I clearly adore, who said to her father, "Oh, Daddy, Uncle Perry sleeps in the same bed with so-and-so." And my brother's reaction was, "Yes, he does." And that kind of normalization is what we need in our society. I think Tyler's life as a musician and as a student and as a son and as a gay man, right? I sense, like many gay men, he needed to compartmentalize those identities. And what we need to do and what our challenges are to move forward is to figure out how we allow people to have all of those identities coexist in one space where in some moments, one part of our identity is more powerful than the other, but never is our identity denied. Any of our identities.
Excellent. And Mignon, you talked to that beautifully, right? Liberation and freedom, kind of being all parts of yourself. Can you speak to that a bit more?
Sure. When I was learning about Tyler's story and the tragedy around that experience, there was just a tragedy on so many levels. And I think that part of our development into full adults is coming to terms with all the different parts of who we are and how we figure that out and how we make our way in the world and what is the context in which we're understanding ourselves and understanding our changing selves. And so, there are these different developmental points in time. And and you're developing at the same time your peers are developing, and they may be at a different place than you. And what do we do with that, right? What do we do if you're, 14-year-old kid who thinks of themselves as gay in high school, and you're in a high school where people just aren't talking about that? How do we manage our development in these different contexts when other people just might not have caught up to us yet? Where do we go? Where do we go to reify who we are, to validate who we are, to strengthen who we are? And then what role do we have in helping others, right? There's so many. We could say, well, we don't have to help others. We're focusing on ourselves. Or we could say, well, I'm going to focus on my parents and helping get to a place. They may not be at a place where I am in understanding sexuality or in understanding who I am, right? You decide, if you come out as gay, for example, you've been thinking about that for a while, but maybe a parent or a best friend hasn't been thinking about it for a while, and they may need some time to catch up. And what happens in those moments while you're waiting for them to get to a place where you are? And so there are all these different things to navigate, all these different positions to navigate during certain developmental times. So if you move to college years, okay, we're all, you're in college now, you're technically an adult, but again, you may be in a different place than others. And what are the tools to help us, to help others get to where we are, and to help us be comfortable with who we are? And so that's where institutions come in for support, where family comes in for support, where they're even classes, right? Even classes in school can help support. So those are some of the ways that I'm thinking about those ideas.
Absolutely. And it's such a beautiful segue to Ellen, right? In the discussion of group dynamics. So please take it away, Ellen, because I do think you have much to offer here.
Oh, thank you, Anna. I really appreciate Perry and Mignon's comments very much. And in thinking about Tyler's life and his untimely death, one of the things that I go to is the collective and issues related to shame and guilt. Mm-hmm. And when I'm speaking about shame and guilt, I'd like to make a distinction. A colleague and I did a presentation in 2018 and subsequently have written a chapter about envy and shame. But we also, in the paper, make the distinction between shame and guilt. And just really quickly, I'd like to say that guilt is really more of an external dynamic where you say to yourself, I did a bad thing, or I shouldn't have done that, or what I did was wrong. And shame is more of an internal feeling where who you are feels wrong, right? You are made, it is not wrong, but you are made to feel that way by the external environment that you live in and all of the external environments that we live and grow in, because there's not just one. And so I think that one of the things that we also really need to look at is the need for groups and organizations and institutions and actually our society to split off parts of ourselves and project them into others, related to issues of fear, related to issues of needing to feel superior, and what the result is with regard to the impact, the devastating impact that those types of projections can have on individuals, and actually the trauma that is caused by really having the world say to you in lots of different ways, you are not enough, and who you are is not okay. And so I think that it's important to look at all of the spaces that we are embedded in, and in the ways that we are embedded in their spaces, and how shame and guilt can escalate to a point that we actually are internalizing those negative things, those racist things, homophobic things, transphobic things that our external environment is always telling us that we need to to change in order to fit in. So I really do think that that's part of the not just the group dynamic, but the collective societal dynamic that we really need to be looking at, in addition to some of the other things that we have to struggle with.
So many gems there, Ellen, so many gems. And I want to come back to Perry and Mignon, because both of you have, in the course of your research, interviewed gay men, in the case of Perry, in Mignon's case, lesbian women, and the ideas that Ellen talks about in terms of the distinction between shame and guilt, the ways in which who you are is made to not be okay because of the environment. Can you speak to that? Does that ring true with the data and the women and men you've spoken to?
I can say something about that. You can hear me over the trucks on Broadway. So in my first book, Invisible Families, Gay Identities, Relationships, and Motherhood Among Black Women, I studied women who were who self-identified as lesbian, gay, bisexual, in the life, or same gender loving, and who were forming families with other women, either through marriages or through long-term relationships or through childbearing, or they were single moms who identified in that way. And then in some of my later research, I look at the relationships that Black LGBTQ people have with their racial and religious communities, and how those identities intersect and what that means for them as people who are committed to the racial group. And I really appreciated Ellen's, I was taking notes, Ellen, as you spoke, about the difference between shame and guilt, because I could see lots of things. One thing I'll just point out are age cohort differences in this shame. And so this current project that I'm working on is on elders, African-American LGBT elders. So I look at sexuality over the life course among Black LGBT people. And this idea of shame has stuck with many of the older Black LGBT people that I have talked to over the years. This feeling that something is wrong inside of them, but they have accepted that this is who they are. And it has influenced how they moved around in society throughout their years. Some talk about how they didn't have children during childbearing years, or during the time when people might have children, because of this shame, right? They felt that they weren't supposed to, they weren't allowed to have children. They weren't allowed to have that component of a life course reflected in them because of who they are. So there's that shame. And what I've seen with younger generations, again, I'm making a broad generalization because there is still shame, but as we in today's society have a different understanding of accepting multiple parts of our identities, there's a different way that operates. So for example, in today's society, you can have a white mother and a Black father and not be considered Black, right? In my father's generation, you had no other choice but to be considered Black. Now you might be considered biracial or multiracial, right? We have a different way of thinking about multiple identities. And I think that also extends to sexuality. There's more of a freedom, with some caveats that we can certainly talk about, but there's more of a freedom to have these different parts. Whereas with the older folks that I interviewed and that I've seen in the archival work, there's been this acceptance that something is off, but I'm still going to go forward and live the life that I want to live. So that's not a full story, but those are some pieces there.
Absolutely. And we have the rich benefit of both you, Mignon, and Perry having done generational work. Right. So I'm curious, Perry, what do you think in relation?
So let me start by saying that, I want to preface my comments by saying I am a white gay man of privilege, right? And so my life experience is shaped by those identities. And even I, as a white gay man of privilege, experience shame every single day of my life. Because of generational effects, what have you. What I love about Mignon's comments, and I think there are differences across the generations. I think that the younger generation, the generation that I refer to in the book as the queer generation, are able to verbalize these experiences of shame about the multiple identities that they hold in their lives in a way that my generation and the generation that preceded me did not. And I think there is an empowerment in the ability to verbalize that. There's an empowerment to stand up and say, I can be gay and Black and exist in this world, right? I can be, female identified and Latinx and a dean of a school at the same time. And that's what I think is different, right? But the shame never really goes away. Because from a young age, I believe, and this is something I've learned from my friend Ellen Short here, is that we experience this feeling of otherness, right? Anybody who is LGBTQ, anybody who's a member of any marginalized population, it feels othered. And that, what goes on from 0 to 5, stays with you throughout your life. So I will tell you very frankly that when I first got to Rutgers a few years ago, there was a lot of turmoil in me internally, because after 20 years at NYU, where I was an openly gay man, where everybody knew who I was, I felt like I had to come out of the closet again and again and again and again. At 53, it was a little easier than 23, but still the experience harkened back to those really traumatic events in my life where I needed to disclose my identity in every context that I navigated. So, shame is still there. And unfortunately, there are individuals in our society and in our political system who intentionally try to shame us because of who we are.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful answer. And so many pieces, so many threads. I have notes here trying to pick up all the threads. So feel free to jump in if there's there's something you want to talk about that you want us to pick up on. But one of the things, Perry, that I'm thinking about in relation to your comments, connecting with Ellen's and Jan's, is to take us toward a conversation about visible and invisible identity. Because we are very much talking about the ways that gay identity joins with other identities that create real similarities in experiences, and ways that, if I pick on racial identity, shape the experience of gay identity. But that story you told, Perry, of coming back out again, right? And you mentioned this in your talk as well about, and you challenged beautifully in your talk, heterosexuals to imagine what it meant to come out over and over again. That's different for gay identity, right? And an invisible identity. When I walk into a room, I'm a Black woman. There's no question, right? There's in my instance, there's less ambiguity. So can we talk about that for a minute? What does this visible and invisible identity have to do with kind of otherness, right? When we think about what it means and how we move through space.
Can I thank you for raising that, and I think this I want to add something that I actually wanted to say before, and I just wanted to on what you said, which is, for me, this feeling of shame and loneliness and marginalization that LGBTQ people experience and people of all marginalized identities experience are so linked to our health, right? And so, I'm at RBHS right now, so to think that HIV is by chance happening in gay Black men, it's ridiculous. It's not happening by chance. It's because Black gay men are experiencing multiple stressors in their lives, living in contexts that perpetuate discrimination on many fronts, and they are more at risk for engaging in risk behaviors that perpetuate HIV, right? So it's like nobody wakes up one morning and says, I want HIV, or I want to be a meth addict, or I want this. I'm over this behavioral stuff. But you allude to something in your question, which I want to sort of redirect and talk about this idea of passing, right? Okay. And the dangers of passing, and also the benefits of passing, right? And so I can pass as a white straight man, right? And I have used that maybe to my own harm over the course of my life in order to navigate spaces. And for other folks who don't have my skin tone, who don't have my, body type, it's much more difficult to pass. And so what I think is really incredible about the younger generation, I think Mignon again referred to this wonderfully, is that many of them don't want to pass, right? And they refuse to pass or to cover, right? And so what we need to do is, so they've got the tools, we've got to work on our institutions that allows individuals who are diverse in these multiple fronts, who, like, you know, like I write in the book about Yao, which is, and even my own like issues around this stuff. Yao, Ghanaian man, strapping, big, walked into the interview room, right, sat down, and he had the most beautiful yellow polished nails I'd ever seen in my life. And I was taken aback because that was my own stuff about gender identity that was coming out in that interview. And so if I'm feeling that, right, me, I can't imagine what's going on, you know, in his experience in the rest of the world. So the change has to happen. Yes, it's happening internally for us. It has to happen institutionally. Nothing will get better.
So much. We're going to come back to both sides. Go ahead, Ellen.
No, I just wanted to connect with what Perry's saying, because I'm really glad that you brought in the construct of passing, because, you know, one of the things that I've been thinking about and have thought about for a long time is, obviously we think that we need passing. We need to pass in all the different kinds of ways that we do, because society tells us that we have to be a certain way in order to get a certain thing and to have a certain kind of life, right? And, you know, like, what is the function of it? It's based on oppression. It's based on all the isms. It's based on patriarchy. And I think that it is important, and I do get what you're saying about the younger generation not wanting to pass and not feeling the need to do that. But I also think that there is still a societal message that holds out the promise, and it is a false promise, that if you speak a certain way and you have a certain amount of education and you dress a certain kind of way, and all of the ways that, you know, Perry, that you were talking about, that one can present oneself to pass in various different kinds of environments, that you can have those things that our country in particular promises people that they are supposed to be able to have. And we know that that's not true just on the basis of people who have Black and brown skin, who can have all of those wonderful things and all of those wonderful attributes and still be assaulted by the police, accused of criminal behavior by a passerby who happens to be white. You know, so I mean, there is that as well, in terms of, I think that that's the false promise of passing. That's the lie of passing. But then I also think that there is I'd like us to, in some ways, think of passing, and also even sometimes closeting behavior, as adaptive. And Perry, you mentioned that. So, you know, I think of it as adaptive. Everybody does it. We all do it. And sometimes we do it because we need to get through the day, right? We need to get through the day without having a microaggressive incident. We need to get through the day and do our job or go to school or whatever it is that we're doing, take care of our families and come home at night safely. And that's why we do it voluntarily or involuntarily, because you can't control what people think you are and what, you know, and again, the projections that people have of you. And then sometimes, you know, on that continuum, we do it to save our lives. So I do think that one of the things that we really need to do is and I'm sure that there is research being done on this. It's not the research that I do. I tend to focus more on group dynamics in relation to those things. But I think that there does need to be more of an examination of passing, not necessarily being pathological, and closeting behavior not necessarily being in any way disordered or pathological, even though it may come from trauma, but that it is also adaptive to the human being, to the human experience to do it. So that's something that I really feel strongly about.
You know, I don't mean to interject, but I just want to add something really quickly to what Ellen said, because I'm 100% on board with what you were saying, Ellen. And I think you're right. Passing cuts both ways, right? And I want to also just, you know, think about Pete Buttigieg for a second, right? He was gay, but not that gay, right? And I say that as a gay man, right? So because he was not that gay, right, he could run for president of the United States, right? And that's the society we live in. And that's why Pete stayed in the closet till he was like 30 years old. And that's why he continues to try to navigate spaces and paths. And I do the same thing. But again, and one of my last comment is, let's recall, and I hope we go through this deeper, there are many people in our world who don't have the privilege of the closet, right? Who can feel safe. And there are many people in the world who unfortunately are forced out of the closet because others victimizing behavior.
I have a comment that is a little bit different.
Go for it.
Thinking about intra-racial dynamics. So how you experience being LGBTQ in your racial and ethnic community. And I have an example from my research that I think would be of interest.
Please.
So in some of the work I did in Los Angeles, I was examining how an organization formed called Black, Gay, and Here to Stay. And it was younger people, I'd say in their 20s and 30s, who were going to march as part of a series of protests going on at the time. They were going to march as an openly gay organization in the Martin Luther King Day parade, right? So many cities have a parade like this. It goes through Black neighborhoods, and this will be the first time in this yearly parade that goes down Crenshaw. We're going to have these signs up, to acknowledge these people as Black and gay. And so I followed this group over 2 years, and we talked about the different things that people expected and what they found. And so one thing that I think is relevant here is is becoming visible within your ethnic community, the fear in that, and how sometimes the community is accepting and sometimes it's not accepting. And so there are examples in this research where it's not accepting, where people are threatening physical harm. And then there are times when people are accepting, such as in this march. This was right after Obama was elected. There was a lot of unity that day. And I wanted to share with you what a young woman said, after the march. If I can share, I'll be able to share the screen. So she says, in this march, there was still, can you see it?
Yep, we can.
There was still some part of me that felt a little bit of fear. She's talking about marching openly down Crenshaw with these signs. Maybe it was a bit of shame in the moment, because I think I have come so far, but then you have to confront them, meaning other Black people. I think it's a beautiful thing when people can get past their internal homophobia and your internal shame that you don't think still needs to be cleansed and thrashed out and put back together. She says those people out there a lot of times are our friends and family members, cousins, people we are going to see tomorrow night. We have to deal with the fact that we are now representing this facet of the community, right? So it's this, they're not saying we're representing this other group. They say, well, we're representing this part of who we all are as a collective. And then she ends with, that's just, I am happy to grow. So I share that because, these are the things that people are negotiating when I don't want to say demanding acceptance because it sounds really aggressive, but just insisting that this is that we are part of this community and this is part of who we are. And just like you want us to help advocate for the new science center for for children after school, because the children need a science center, and I don't have any children, but as a member of this community, I want more programs for Black children. I want you to now help advocate for me when I need some resource that relates to my sexuality. And so it's this negotiation that's taking place in the process of becoming visible that I think is important here.
So just brilliance all around from all of you that I so appreciate. We're talking about passing visible and invisible identity, notions of the closet broadly, but I want us to talk about the closet like as a construct really concretely for a moment, because it's coming up. But let's talk, the symposium is called Life After the Closet. in particular. And there's an image, Perry, in your talk where you have a Black girl peeking from behind a door where there's a rainbow behind her, that I thought was really illustrative. And in the image for this talk, we've got an open door with a rainbow coming out. But there's this choice of kind of how we negotiate the closet. And Mignon, what I heard in that quote was Sister Muhammad, I believe, was her name, talking about being in the community, but choosing to, prior to holding up that sign, being a member of that community in a closeted form, right? And so what is the utility, right, of the closet? She's offering one and is raising kind of the challenges of coming out, but let's have that conversation. What's the role of the closet in terms of how people choose to use it? Ellen, you said before that rather than thinking about it as pathological, that we can think about it as adaptive. So if we go with that frame, there are protective elements, there are oppressive elements. How do we think about that? How are you all thinking about that in the context of your work, please?
I think I would say that I want to refer to, Anna, the article that you sent us.
Please, go for it.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. The author was sort of in a sort of nostalgic way, even though he understood the consequences of closeting himself and the trauma that the trauma always comes before the behavior in what we're talking about, but the consequences of that closeting behavior. But what I really thought was so interesting about it was just the reflection of it. Mm-hmm. And then coming to his realization through, he did sort of like a little qualitative study mm-hmm. in reaching out to other men who were themselves closeted, coming to the conclusion at the end of the article that, yeah, there might be some things that I think I missed, but maybe I'm just fantasizing about that, because the consequences of it are so great that I'm better out. I'm better the way that I am. I'm better being authentically who I am. And I want to say, I think just to add on to what we've been talking about, I wanted to, and this might be a little bit heavier, but I think, what Mignon shared in terms of the community and becoming more visible in one's community by being authentically who a person is, that particular Sister Muhammad, who she was. I think that there's also things that we have to think about with relation to intergenerational issues related to trauma, and also very much related to closeting behavior. So, for example, one of the things that's coming up for me is, you know how sometimes you ask I don't know if you know this, but sometimes you can ask a client or a patient to do a genogram of their lives, and you can have different themes for genograms. So I was thinking how useful it might be, in therapy, for example, which we haven't really talked very much about yet, for clients or patients to create genograms of, if they are aware of it, closeted behavior in, let's say, 3 generations of their family or more that they might be aware of, in addition to thinking about the community, and in addition to thinking about the utility of the closet. What are the intergenerational consequences of it as well?
Absolutely. I want to give before Perry and Mignon, you jump on in here, I just want to give the audience context for the article that Ellen's referring to. So I shared a piece with the panelists written by Drew Nellen Smith, and it's just a public article written for Vice called "What I Miss About Being in the Closet." And he says, life after coming out of the closet is sometimes harder than you'd anticipate. But he poses a question: does it negate the pain of staying closeted? And in the article, as Ellen really excellently described, comes to the conclusion, no, right? It doesn't negate the pain. I actually am okay with this. So we'll make sure we share that out on our social media channels under the hashtag Life After the Closet. Mignon, Perry, please take the question.
Yeah, we stay in the closet because sometimes we have to protect our lives. And You know, I'm going to tell you about a year ago, and this happens to me still, right? And, you know, look at me. I mean, like, and, you know, all the check boxes should say that everything should be easy in my life, right? But I got into an Uber to go, I don't know, somewhere because I'm lazy and I always take an Uber everywhere. And, the Uber driver was, you know, carrying on about his wife and his kids and blah, 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 and asking me about my wife and kids. And I didn't correct him, right? I recloseted myself. I recloseted myself because at that particular moment, it felt safer to me as this man was driving to do that. And so the closet is a painful, and then afterwards I was just like beating myself up, right? Because of why did I do that, right? But I think sometimes I would like us to be in a society where we don't ever have to do that. But unfortunately, that's not the society that we're in. The pain of being in the closet is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly powerful. But for many of us, it also is a lifeline. And so let's see how we can ultimately get rid of the closet so we don't need to go back into it. But don't just pull the Band-Aid off right now, because a lot of people need the closet to survive.
Thoughts about this that are not so much an either or, being in a closet or out of a closet, but more, and this is coming from the experiences I've had with the people that I've written about and studied and talked to, when to share. Right? I mean, I could imagine a straight person in that Uber not sharing just because they don't want to share. They don't want to talk to this person.
Right.
Maybe there's a fear connected to safety if it's a woman, or maybe not. But when I think about, there's an 83-year-old man in my book that I'm working on now, a Black man who has lived through everything that a Black gay man would have lived through in New York. He was one of the men who used to roller skate, back in the 70s, when you'd see a bunch of guys up and down Manhattan on roller skates. He was part of that group. And in my family, it's noteworthy because he's my uncle. He was a vegetarian in a Southern family where people just did not eat meat. In the 60s and 70s, just when you went to your grandmother's house, you just ate whatever she cooked. And so anyway, he's never said to his family that he's gay. He's just never said that. We all know that he's gay. And he makes little subtle references, but he has never said it. And what does that mean, right? Does that mean he's in the closet? I've been trying to work on this concept of what it means and how you express your sexuality and what it means for different generations and what it means in different moments in a temporal sense, whether it's late at night or on a Sunday morning, you're going to get bagels, what it means in a historical sense, right, in different communities and different eras, but even for what it means for you as a person and understanding your power. So I have a chapter in my first book, Invisible Families, that is called Coming Into the Life. And I talk about, it's not called Coming Into the Life, but it's about not coming out of the closet where you say to your mother at Thanksgiving, I am, gay, I'm a lesbian, but coming into an understanding of what that means in a particular cultural context. And so for these women, it's about what it means to come into the life of a Black lesbian in New York in the 70s or 80s, and all that means culturally, which what kind of socializing you do, what kind of people you meet, and how you combine that new world of other same gender loving people with the world that you already know, which is the music and the dancing and the hairstyles and the clothes, and bringing those things together to create something that is felt deep inside, that comes from years of of a cultural or historical experience, and then also being able to be freer in who you love. And so that's another way to think about this, rather than coming into a life that has these different components that allow all of these things to come together in interesting ways for you.
Yes, absolutely. I see you, Perry. I was coming to you next because in Perry's brilliant talk earlier, he talked about the unspoken telling, if I'm recalling that correctly. So please, Perry, say more.
I was listening to Mignon thinking like, oh my God, can we just panel just go on for hours and hours and hours? Unspoken, like, I used to think in my research, 10 years ago, that if you didn't, verbally come out and say, I'm gay, that was going to ultimately have like very negative health consequences for you. And I'm not convinced of that anymore. And I think there's enough research out there to indicate right now that for some people, like Mignon's uncle, I think you said, Mignon, or my husband, Bobby, who is, white, working class, Irish Catholic from Long Island. You notice I said Long Island, that he never told his parents, right? And is he any less psychologically or physically or socially healthy than I am? I don't know. And I think that we need to disentangle that. The other thing I would like to say to Mignon's comment, and I think that she expressed so brilliantly and wonderfully, is it's not a dichotomy. Right? It's actually like this continuum, right? And I float across this continuum. Sometimes I'm really out of the closet, sometimes I'm a little bit in the closet. And like every context we navigate, that context in some ways shapes the way we present ourselves to the people in that environment. I would hope that increasingly as time goes on, that one part of our identity, or those identities that we seem to have some shame about, we feel safer expressing them in more environments than in ones right now. So last comment here, like, would I hold my husband's hands in certain sections of Queens, New York? No. Because I think, like, if I were to go there, because I would be afraid. Would I hold his hand, in the West Village in Manhattan? Yes, I would. But I give that as an example again, because I don't want us to diminish, like recloseting ourselves, because I think sometimes we need to do it in order to survive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that takes me to another place, if you permit me to go completely left here for a moment. Let's think about the ways that other groups, non-gay groups, right? The ways that we associate the closet with LGBT identity. What in a fictional world might other groups desire a closet? And so I'm thinking about Black men's interaction with the police, right? The ability to no longer be seen, right? To be perceived as less of a threat in that moment, right? Might we see it as beneficial? So, and play with the metaphor the way that you'd like, but in some ways, if we take the notion of the closet, the kind of adaptability, the ability to survive that it offers, and apply it to a very different kind of context, what might happen?
Anna, can you repeat what you said about your example? I didn't quite hear it. What was the example?
Yeah. So what I was saying is, if you permit me, you can't hear me, Mignon, either?
Oh, when you were describing it, at a point it went out, so I couldn't hear it either.
Oh, okay. What I was saying is, if you permit me to go left, to draw a really alternate universe example here. And I'm saying, imagine the closet and separate the closet from the notions of LGBT identity and apply it to another identity, a more visible identity. For instance, interactions of Black men with the police. Right? Might the notion of a closet, the ability to mask your identity in moments of safety, be applicable, right? Might it be protective and clarify some of the things we're talking about now?
That's I remember you did ask that question in your email, and I thought about it. And it does take me to a couple of places, but one is that I think that Black and brown people, it's not that they have tried to mask their identities, but they have tried to, in different ways, present themselves in such a way that they would not be thought of, you know, in negative ways by the dominant culture, right? The other thing that I'm thinking of, and I'm a little hesitant to say this because I need to have a little bit more context to explain it. But what I will say, because you're asking us to be creative and you're asking us to think in a different way, I taught a multicultural counseling course for many years. And in that course, I assigned 3 papers to my students, and they were graduate students. They were preparing to become counselors and marriage and family therapists and school counselors and mental health counselors. And the 3rd paper was a paper in which I asked them to imagine that they went to sleep one night and they woke up the next day and that they were in a different identity, intersectionally, right? And I gave them choices, but I didn't restrict them to any particular type of identity or any particular choice. I just wanted them to write a paper about what their identity would be and what it told them about themselves in, you know, as who they are, right? And so most of my students were students of color, primarily women of color. And generally speaking, 2 things would happen. Many of the students of color, particularly the Black women, were not able to, chose not to change themselves and change their identities. And they were very, very, very clear about why they chose not to do it. That, you know, they talked about how proud they were of being Black women and how it was important for them to be loyal to their identity and to not wish to be anything other than what they are, despite the messages that they're constantly receiving by society. And then there were some students who would take the fantasy and wish to be white, right? And they had a lot of different fantasies about what it would be like to be white and how much privilege they would have and what they could do with that whiteness and what it would be like. And so the paper was really, really interesting from that perspective and particularly what it told them about themselves and the fantasies that they had about who they were and who they thought the other was. And there were occasionally men who, very few, but occasionally some men in my class also fantasized about being women and what that meant and what that would be like for them. So, I mean, your question makes me think about that. And then the last thing I'll say, your question makes me think about other identities. Like, for example, I am a cisgender, heterosexual, Black African-American woman who is not married, who is single, who is self-supporting, who has chosen consciously not to have children. So, for example, those are some of my identities that people make assumptions about all the time with regard to my status. And, you know, I don't always think of it as being closeted, but, you know, as Perry was saying, if I get into an Uber with somebody who starts talking about whatever, their partner and their children and this and that and the other, and, you know, I get it, but I don't really necessarily relate to it in a real way. I, you know, more than likely don't say, I mean, sometimes I just don't want to get into it and I don't say anything, right? Very often I'm in a group of people who go on, and now it's grandchildren. First it was children and now it's grandchildren. They go on, and I, you know, listen, I have nothing against that, but they go on and on and on and on about their offspring, right? Their children. And I think that's wonderful. But again, I've actually taken to saying I do not have any children by choice. Because there are also assumptions made about that. And, you know, this is my life and this is the way that I live my life as an African-American woman, middle-aged African-American woman. So yeah, so that's where I'm sorry to take so long, but that's where I went with your question.
Oh no, I mean, great directions, and kind of the beauty of it is that you really do get to take it where you want it to go. Who's up next? Tell me how you enter the twilight zone I've offered.
I was so appreciative of Ellen's remarks because as you asked that, Anna, I was thinking, I don't know. I mean, I feel like the Black women who were students in Ellen's class, theoretically, I could see how you might want to hide a stigmatizing identity in a context where that identity can end up threatening your life. But I can't see that I would do it if I had, I don't know that I would have a hard time thinking through how to imagine this. Maybe I would need to go to sit in therapy with Ellen and figure this out. The thing I did think about though was the ways that Black, sometimes, and this is just one example, Black middle class people try to destigmatize their racial identity by playing up a class identity. And I would say in my life, and now Ellen, I'm going to talk about my children, which is I was going to try not to talk about them, but it's relevant in this context. My wife and I were both Black women. We have 2 Black children, and we live in Manhattan, and our children they go to independent schools, to private schools. And I wrote about the process of applying to private schools for them and trying, I mean, I don't have to do much to play up my class identity because I can talk about my what I do for work, but I think this idea about having a way to destigmatize an identity certainly comes into play there, because we have these identities as lesbian, we're openly a 2-mom family, we're brown, right? We're not wealthy, right? We have some means, but we're not wealthy. And so how do we compensate, right? Maybe we, do other, show in other ways how similar we are to some of the parents that might also be attending these schools. And so I don't think that's closeting, and it just made me think about how people might, in an example of the context that Anna describes with the police, try to destigmatize or create another way for that group to see the group, see your group.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for this conversation. Again, I can't thank you enough, but I wanna veer it a little bit in a little slightly different direction, which is to bring it back to the LGBTQ population. And then I think it's very easy for us. Well, first of all, let's all start from the place that we're all sick and tired of hearing the term LGBTQ and thinking that it's a monolith. I'm just over that. Like, we're not just one thing. There's not just one Greek. There's not just one African American. I mean, it's like this notion that we have to all be in this box, and all of us are in that box are the same somehow. It's just completely despicable to me, and I'm over it. I want to say that with regard to this issue, that we also need to think about the stigmatization and the othering of race that also goes on within the population, right? So there is often in my own work, I have found this fetishizing and this like labeling that goes on of men of color, whether they're Asian men or Latinx men or Black men by white men. And this is, to me, a perpetuation of, societal images of what it means to be a Black man, right? And so the work that we have to do as a society in terms of, navigating spaces where Black men interact with police, right, also translate to the work we have to do with spaces in the gay population, with Black men navigating gay communities, right? So, I go every weekend because in some ways I'm incredibly stereotypical to my place on Fire Island, right? And it's like a bunch of white guys, right? The Pines Mignon, and then you go to Cherry Grove, All right. I know you don't appreciate that. As you go to Cherry Grove, and it's not a bunch of white guys, right? And there's just like this segregation that goes on even within the population itself. Or we think about the other stigmatization that goes on of me as an older man, or somebody as a potentially slightly overweight man, or somebody as a slightly shorter individual. And those kind of isms that gay men and lesbians and trans folks experience from society at large exist in our society, in our own population. And I'll tell you with this long last thing, about 2 years ago, and this is always it blows my mind. 2 years ago, I wrote an editorial for the New York Star Ledger calling out the racism in the LGBTQ population. And when I went to work the next day, people said to me, I had no idea. Like, what do you mean you had no idea? Like, LGBTQ people are people too, right? And like, they're racist, right? And so this notion that somehow, if you're in a marginalized population, you don't marginalize is absurd. So it would be easy in my life to blame like the white straight men for everything, and I often do. But sometimes there's also work to be done internally within our own population, right, to deal with the marginalization and the oppression and the recloseting we do to each other.
Just so thoughtful. One of the reasons I asked you that question is mind bending as it was, because I think that when you consider a question like the closet in a completely different context, it makes other things clearer. And so in your answers, what you made clear were the elements of the closet that other groups find, or the conditions, I should say, that make choosing the closet not an option. And so for the Black woman in your example, Ellen, it was a sense of deep pride, ownership, belief, a kind of cultural belonging that was like, I absolutely don't want to give that up. Right. And in the case, if I go back up to Mignon's earlier example of kind of coming into the life, right? That the not one. So there had been a kind of cohesion, right, if you will, this greater acceptance that the closet would remove that. So what you lost as a result of choosing the closet then is much clearer. And so if we go back to where we started in some ways around why people choose the closet, it makes clearer the absence of that for so many. Ellen, you were going to say something before.
Just to connect with what you're saying, Anna, and what Perry and Mignon and I've been talking about. I love this show, so I have to say it because it fits in exactly with what we're talking about. I've been watching Lovecraft Country on HBO, and so Randy and Anna, have you been watching?
I heard lots about it, but I have not watched it yet.
Okay, I tell you, some of the episodes really delve into what we've been talking about today, about identity, passing, and closeting behavior and trauma, racialized trauma, what Janet Helms would call, ethno-violence and intergenerational trauma due to racism, but also the fantasy, because it's Black science fiction, right? I'm not really into science fiction, so I needed there's podcasts that explain, what certain things are afterwards. But if you think about Get Out and Us with Jordan Peele, it's in that genre, right? Yep. And so I'm just so resonant with it right now with this conversation. I encourage you, if you all have time, to check it out, because it really does, and it also speaks to gay men in particular, and closeting identity and race, and it's very powerfully done. So it's an excellent series. I really like it. So I just wanted to say that, because it's making me think a lot right now about what I've seen on that show we're talking about.
Absolutely. Mignon, I see you smiling. What are you thinking about?
I keep wanting to watch it.
Now you have an academic reason. You must connect it to your body of research to enlighten the masses.
But Ellen points to like this reality, right? Which is like art always is ahead of the game, right? Like art, we need art to show us the way, and then we as scholars eventually catch up, and then I guess scientists, and then society catches us. So this is, you know, what I think is so great about it. And I'm going to do a pitch for our university for a second here, right? What's so great about our university is this ability to do this really, really interdisciplinary work, right? Because when you bring Mason Gross and the School of Public Health together and psychology together, then you get to something that's really a reflection of these multiple disciplines working to understand humanity. And I think the arts just do that really, 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 really well.
Absolutely. And I think that I love the concrete illustration, Ellen, of what my question tried to do in a much more amateur sense, right? Which is, let's shift gears for a moment and think about something in a way we wouldn't normally think about it and see what it shows us, right? Because the ways of, the typical ways, the way that we began our conversation, understanding the closet, and in some ways, the ways of the public narratives around the closet are kind of oversimplified. This conversation alone has kind of deepened and exposed contours in the way that we think about understand the closet that I just think are so incredibly rich. But we've got a little bit more time, and I want to take us in a somewhat different direction, if you would, going back to where we started. And I want to draw on a bit of all of your opening comments about what brings you to this work, but I'm going to go in order. Because I want to start with Ellen. You started by talking about the ways that counseling and psychology has at times pathologized and kind of the consequences of that kind of pathologization and the goal to interrupt that. And so I want to pose a question to the group around what does it take then, knowing that that is our historical context, knowing that society in many ways has that consequence. What are the strategies? What are the ways that campus and society more broadly need to shift to become a place that enables people to thrive more broadly? So knowing that's our history, what do you think?
I think just using
Alan Spiegel and
just using the example of the field of counseling and psychology.
Wait, we lost you for a second, Ellen.
Classes and my
Hold on one second, Ellen, can you start again?
Can you hear me now?
We lost you for a second. I think you're coming back though.
Yeah. Yeah, because I had a phone call. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. I think institutions and organizations and particularly academic institutions, if I want to make a parallel to the field of counseling and psychology, need to try to focus on reparative work. I mean, the only reason that we have multicultural counseling harm.
Ellen, we're losing some of your audio clarity. Ellen, can you hear me? We're losing your audio clarity. Can you try turning off your video for a moment and seeing if that lets us hear you better?
Oh, sure, sure.
Okay. Can you try talking one more time?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
I'm sorry about that. I just really was just trying to say, to make a parallel to the field of counseling, to think about work, levels of embeddedness and systemic resistance, basically. Just to say really quickly, levels of embeddedness really have to do with all of the levels that a particular academic institution is embedded in. For example, geographically, in terms of the community, in terms of historical significance. What is the university's relationship to history? For example, we know that there are many academic institutions that have relationships to slavery, right? And enslavement. And their very existence in some cases is owed to the horrors of slavery. So you know, that's a historical significance and a layer of embeddedness that needs to be focused on. And in terms of the systemic resistance, I just think it's really important to understand that systems resist change. I mean, you know, we can kind of talk about it, and academic institutions are really good about making mission statements, which are really important, and having committees, which are also really important, and hiring people who focus on those particular issues, diversity, inclusion, equality, all of those things. But I think implementing them and understanding that they will be resisted because people fear the change that they bring is really important. Sorry for all of the interference with the internet, but that's kind of what I wanted to say about that.
No problem. We got you. Other takes, Perry, Mignon, and I can give you the prompt again if you need it, or just dive in.
Well, I was thinking about Ellen's comments in Columbia, where I work, and I work also at Barnard College. And it is very hard to change the culture of an institution. It takes a very purposeful acts. And, you know, even then, there are just so many forces working against that the change is incremental and usually comes at great cost, and often comes in a moment of crisis where you're just forced to do something because because structures, especially, you know, people who are advantaged by them they're reticent to give them up, and they just don't see why you need to change, or they disagree with the need to change. And so I think I've tried to approach change kind of in my work. I've tried to approach change by using mainstream methods to study a marginalized population, and thereby allowing people who have no interest in the population to still see the sociology in the work, to value the sociology in the work, and then to use that as a way to change, to move forward a body, a subfield, several subfields in my discipline. When I think about Columbia and the reticence of Columbia to change from white male dominance, I see the students who just think differently. And I was an undergraduate at Columbia, and I think that the students in this generation are saying, we don't care. We don't care about the history. We want it to change. We think this is wrong. We want it to change. Whereas in my generation, we said, yes, this is horrible. Is it, you know, all of this focus on European history is terrible, and we wish there was something else. These students are saying, oh no, there has to be something else. We insist. And it makes me say, whoa, you know, you're going to tell the school this, but they're saying, you know, they have a different relationship to hierarchies than even my generation. And it's kind of hard, right? When the student says to you, this is, you know, Columbia University is named after Christopher Columbus, and what does that mean? Right? It's hard. Whereas I think as a student, I would have been afraid to tell President Bollinger something like that. I just wouldn't have been able to do that. And they're able to do that. And so even if the university doesn't want to change, how are you going to answer these questions? These very public questions, right? We have a different social world where these questions are happening, not behind closed doors. And so change is an iterative process. It comes in fits and starts, but there is this, when there's a driving force, it may not happen right away, but those, so I would like to think the work that my generation did were to create some crumbles, right? To dislocate the foundation. And then the next generation comes and shakes that foundation that's already begun to crumble, or shakes the facade, and in pieces, it comes down or it changes.
Thank you.
Enough.
I just wanted to just quickly connect with what Mignon was saying. Just really quickly, just to connect with, I think that's also happening in the larger society as well, with regard to changing the names of buildings, pulling down statues of white men who have perpetrated crimes on humanity, even though they have also been viewed as doing very positive things. And I do think that that is part of the larger structure in terms of our society, making these sort of small incremental changes and refusing to go along with the status quo that we've been going along with for so long. So I appreciate your comment. It reminds me of that.
And thank you both for your comments. And I'm gonna say this from a place of, you know, frustration, but also hope, right? Which is enough, right? So, you know, I say that, you know, as an act up guy who like screamed and yelled and threw himself on the street, right? Because we didn't want to die, but at the never really gave up hope that we were going to get through this. But I will tell you that I do also, like Mignon, have hope that what we did is going to give power to a new generation, right? To actually question things. Like, you know, Mignon and I probably read the same damn books in like the core of literature humanities. I was like, Greeks again? And like, I'm a Greek, but like, come on, man. Like, enough of the Greeks, right? Right? So let them push it and change lit humanities and music humanities and CC and all of that stuff, so it's inclusive of the world. But I will say to you that Anna, we have work to do here at our institution. You know, when I first came here and we decided we were going to have a concentration in LGBTQ health, right? The world's first concentration, you know, an individual said to me, a colleague said to me, oh, people are saying there's too much LGBTQ at the school. And I said, what the F does that mean, right? And, you know, and that kind of aggression goes on all the time. And so we need, yes, academia is really hard to change, but you know what? I'm done. And I think those of us who are part of this conversation today, those of us who are in a leadership role, those of us who look like me have a responsibility to say enough. You know what? The guidelines for promotion and tenure are racist. And I'm going to say that till the day I die. And what are they going to do? Fire me? Good luck trying to fire me. And so we have to act up. We have to speak up. We have to question. We have to push. We have to do it respectfully, hopefully, but we can't just stay silent about it anymore, because I look at my school, which is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful representation of students in terms of race and culture and first gen. And then I look at my faculty and it's a joke. And it's a joke because I can't hire people that look like America because of the restrictions that are placed upon me about how I recruit and how I retain people. So we have to fight around these issues, and it has to happen now. And I think what we saw what we saw last night, you know, on the television, on the MSNBC or the CNN or whatever you watched, was, you know, a representation of like the last days of the Roman Empire, trying to hold on to that last inch of power before everything changes. So my hope in this is that this is the last thing before things change.
I so appreciate the ways that all three of you in very different ways got at structure. And structure as kind of the obstacle and the place that we have to focus efforts on change. I'd like us to come a level down in our final word, which is as we wait for institutions to change, whether it's incremental, iterative, understanding the difficulties, the complexities, how do we work to support young men and women who, like Tyler, are navigating the right now? What are your words around what needs to happen to ensure that there is a sense of safety, right? That there is room for people to show up and be authentic while we wait for institutions and structures to change?
So I'm going to jump in here because I want to. Sorry if I'm being hyper masculine here, guys. But I'm going to talk about Danielle Green. Danielle Green was one of my students. She's an African-American woman, a lesbian who was in the military, who was an MPH student in our school, and now is a leader at one of the local universities, local hospitals here, who after I came to the school said to me, oh my God, I didn't know I could be a dean. And then I saw you, an openly gay man, right? Not the same race, not the same gender identity, but an openly gay man living your truth as a gay person every single day. So what I'm going to ask for my LGBTQ peers is to do the same thing. I don't get to be gay just sometimes. I'm gay 24/7. And so the more I am my authentic self, and the more I realize that as a gay man, I am not also the sole representation of the LGBTQ population, and own that and say that, the more students like Tyler and students who look different or are different from Tyler will feel safe in their spaces.
Thank you. Final words, Mignon, Ellen, please.
I don't want to go last, so I'll go next.
Take it away, Mignon.
Ellen is going to bring us home with the depth. No, I don't have any profound words. I can just say what I've tried to do, and what I try to help my university and my college do through my leadership and governance work, and that's talk the talk and walk the walk. And so when I teach, I try to I talk about these issues and the freedom that comes with being able to be a full self and allow others to be their full selves, and what that would mean in, within the whatever the course, it's a course on gender or intersectionality or sociology of African American life, what it would mean in those moments. And I try to project that in the classroom in terms of others speaking and sharing. And I can see it. I mean, I can see them grow. I could see them stand taller through the semester as they realize that they can have a voice. And I try in my leadership and governance work to do that, to put things on the table, right? To say what everyone is dancing around. If I'm on the university senate, and I try to make sure that we're living up to our ideals. And so I think if people, individuals in the institution would work on those things in the different aspects of institutional life, I'm hopeful that it would also resonate in those interpersonal sessions. And students tell me that they've, long after class, they continue to talk about the ideas in class, in other settings, in the dorms or when they're eating. And that kind of change, I think, can help when you have these moments where students are trying to figure out what to do, how to behave, how to treat others. And so I'm 50. I'm not, in the dorm anymore, but so that would be the way I would try to make an impact, in the work that I do.
You said you had nothing profound to offer. I would disagree. Alan, please, final word.
Yeah, I disagree too. I think both what Perry and Mignon offered was very profound. I don't know if what I have to offer will be, but I can say that in my work and in really the way that I try to live my life, to honor authenticity, to also understand that safety is relative, right? And contextual. And I think I have shown my students this time and time again, that being authentic is sometimes costly and can sometimes be exhausting, actually, when you are not joined by the group, or when you are not joined and supported by the organization, and so, or the institution. And so one of the things that I really value is, I do think it's important, Anna, in relation to your question, is how do we help our students and our academic community to feel safer? Well, I think it's important to understand that it's okay to say when you don't feel safe, right? It's okay. It should be permissible to say, like, for example, when I have, as Mignon was talking about in the committee work that I've done as a faculty member, when I have said the unspeakable thing, which I'm actually kind of well known for doing in my family and in multiple communities, Perry knows that. But I mean, when I have said that unspeakable thing and I get punished for it in a particular way, I have learned that I can say I am being punished. And I am not being joined. And why is that happening? What is going on? And I think that I think it's a fantasy to think that we're always going to walk in spaces that are safe for us, because, if anyone listens to, and I hope they do, what we've talked about today, we know that's not true. But what we can do is we can deconstruct the lack of safety and ask why it's that way, and ask why we're not being joined. And, I think that is really what group work has taught me, in my life, and as well as what I have internalized that doesn't belong to me, that belongs to someone else, right? That has been projected upon me, and asking people to take their projections back. Asking people to take the things that they are putting on you back and take ownership of that. And there's a lot of different ways to do that institutionally, but it's really, really hard work. And I think that sometimes the system just likes to rely on one or two of us who's willing to do it. And everybody else kind of just puts their head down and goes about their business and does what, important things that they need to do. But I just think that it's important to really, really, really understand the limits of our capacity and the importance of speaking out when we need assistance and when we need to be joined. And I'll just say one more thing. Perry, when you talked about your colleague who made that really ignorant comment to you about, there's too much LGBTQ going on here. That's an example right there of the system resisting change, right? The system pushing back and using you as the focus point of resisting that change because of your leadership role. And those are the kinds of things that are fear-based, and those are the kinds of things that I think we need to continue to interrogate and speak out about, because that was also an attack on you. And what you're trying to do, which means it was an attack on the system.
Again, you said, I don't think I have anything profound to add. I disagree. This panel, man, my greatest thanks. I had high hopes for what we would be able to discuss and get to, and you exceeded them on all fronts. Simply amazing. Brilliant, thoughtful conversation. I so appreciate the time that you spent with us today. And to all of those watching the live stream, thank you for joining us for this moment to learn, understand, and remember. Our aim was to reflect on Tyler's life, but to use it as a moment to imagine the path forward. And the brilliant panelists, Perry, Mignon, and Ellen today helped us to think beyond the lenses of LGBTQ identity alone, to imagine its implications for a wide range of identities, including race, but class and gender identity more broadly. So thank you again to the panelists. Thank you to all of us for joining, to all of you for joining. And we're going to close now with a video from Rutgers talking about the ways that the university itself has changed in the last 10 years to take steps that we've talked about to become a more inclusive and welcoming climate, to take steps to hope, right? We can't guarantee, but to take steps to ensure that students like Tyler who come to Rutgers don't have the same experience that he did. Thank you.
Tyler Clementi's untimely death brought a moment of reckoning, which compelled Rutgers to develop programs and services that support belonging and inclusion, so the university can make good on the promise of its core values.
Hi, my name is Kiwan Kalk, and I use he and him pronouns. I'm the director for the Center for Social Justice Education and LGBT Communities. I think the research that Rutgers has done to acknowledge and unpack our painful histories has caused us to grow and be better.
My name is Will Vargas, and I'm the lead community-based counselor at CAPS. CAPS stands for Counseling, ADAPS, and Psychiatric Services. One of the things you might not know about CAPS is that we have community-based counselors embedded at various locations, a residence hall, and the cultural centers.
Over these past 10 years, we've made real progress, real changes to become a safer, more respectful community.
When I think about community, I think about the people who support and uplift one another. It is with those same people that we find education, empowerment, as well as are able to be brave, courageous, and our authentic selves.
Community is inclusive, it invites, is welcoming, and it feels safe.
Rutgers is its best when you can be you, and you can be you, and you can be you. We're better as a community, and our work will never be done. Ever mindful of Tyler's memory, we recognize above all that we must keep growing and learning together.